Hello, everybody. Inspector Steve Deal here, Deal. I'm a retired firefighter from the city of Houston. I've been in the fire business now 49 years. I've inspected uh, buildings. Half of those were high rise buildings, multi stories, for 4 years. I fought fire for 4 years, and I taught for 30 years before I retired from the fire department in 2011. All total, I've been teaching now for 42 years. I'm a pre-fire planning specialist. I work with building management staff to try to keep from having devastating fires in their buildings. And I have 15 new services. I have 7 online classes. You can contact me through dealsconsulting.com, or you can Google Inspector Steve Deal. Today, I want to talk to you about the problems that firefighters have communicating with each other inside buildings. Okay, all buildings, but especially high rise buildings, even though we have had some deaths because of communication problems in one story buildings. Um, uh, this video is for building owners, building managers, chief engineers, and firefighters. The question I ask building managers when I do consultations, I have a 3 hour consultation I teach for building management staffs on site. And I ask them, does the building owner know? Um, does your boss know? Do you know? Do all the CEOs know that are tenants in your office buildings? Do all the residents know who live in this residential building that the firefighters can't talk to each other, probably won't be able to talk to each other, communicate, because their radios don't work inside of many building structures? I'm told that many of them use their cell phones. Even if you have firefighter telephone systems in your building, they have their problems. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But the firefighter, I am told, uses their cell phone to talk to the chief in the fire control room um, when they need to communicate about a certain event or what's happening in their building that they're fighting a fire in. There's a lady that has 2 buildings in West Houston. There's a driveway between 2 of them. They look just alike. One's kind of new, one's a little older. And she says the firefighter radios work in one building, but they won't work in the other one. And that's the problem. In 1981, the City of Houston Building Code, the new one, had what we call a high rise package to make high rise buildings actually safer and to help firefighters during a fire emergency. They'd have to have a 2 hour fire rated fire control room, fire alarm system, public address system, HVAC controls, generators, smoke detectors everywhere. And one of the features was a firefighter telephone system that plugs in. Now, you had to have 2 handsets per 10 floors. So if you have a 10-story building, you'd only have 2 of these. Well, that's not very many if you have a working fire in the building. If you have a working fire in the building, you could have 30 fire trucks there with 3 or 4 people on each truck, and we only have 2 of these. But that was the law, which is, I guess, better than nothing. You take these phones and you would plug them in to a jack in the elevator lobbies, in the elevator cars. They even had one in the elevator control panel. The plug-in jacks would be inside or outside of the stairwells. They would be at the top of the stairwell. They would be in the elevator control room and some other places. But you have a firefighter handset that would go down to the fire alarm panel, and there would be a master headset. They all look the same except one's hardwired in the fire control room, and the firefighter, of course, would take the one with the portable phone with the jack. Um, when the firefighter would plug in to talk to the person in charge of the fire in the fire control room, there would be a light that lit up in some panels, and you would push the button to acknowledge and to talk. You could only talk to one person at one time. Now, another problem with these is that the phones, you can't talk, or when you do talk, you have to push in this button, which is the same color as the phone. By the way, these phones can be black or they can be red. So a black one will have this button here for both parties to talk. You would also have to talk, push a button at the top sometimes. The button would be here, it would be there. The one at the top was very, very small, about the size of an eraser on a pencil. It would be very easy not to see that. So the staff that meets the fire department to assist them during a fire emergency, if there's staff there, they have to be able to tell the firefighter, they must be trained to tell them, you must push the button in here, or you must push the button in at the top, or they will not hear you when you're talking. Now, some plugs, some firefighter plug-in jacks. The problems with that is that they're supposed to have a halo or a beveled ring around them that indicated what that hole was for, because it was just a hole. And we call these halos or beveled rings, and sometimes you can't read them. They're faded. It's just a red circle or a black circle. They're faded out. I've seen jacks and elevators that didn't have a ring around it, so all you had was a hole the size of this plug-in jack, the size of a pencil, if you will, and there was no indicator as to actually what it was for. Now, I was talking to a guy one day. Well, actually, I was doing a fire drill in a high-rise building in the medical center. It was an old building with new elevators, and I noticed that they had firefighter plug-in jacks in the elevator cars, in the lobbies, and at the elevator control panel, but there's no firefighter system in the building because they don't have a PA system. You have to have a PA system, which is part of the fire alarm system, or you cannot have the firefighter telephone system. So there was no jacks because there was no system. So I asked the building manager about that. They asked the elevator people about it, and the elevator specialist said the firefighters bring their own phones when they come, which is wrong. The firefighters don't carry these when they go into a high-rise building. The building has to provide it. That is the law. So I told them, have him come out here. I will bring a fire phone, and we'll let him show us how it works. Of course, he never came out there because they don't have a system. So you can have a jack that says fire on the beveled ring. It can say fire, firefighter, fire phone, and there's no wires on it. It's not hooked up because the building doesn't have the system. And what about the elevator test that must be done by law every year, or at least here in Texas, where a third-party inspector watches the elevator person do a test? They never plugged in any of the phones to see if they were working or not when they did the test? What about the fire inspector? Or maybe he's not properly trained, or she's not properly trained, where some old buildings with new elevators have jacks, but they don't have any wires. Something they might want to check in the future. So if you're a firefighter and you're doing pre-fire survey of a multi-story building, okay, where you have firefighter telephone, you might want to make sure they're actually hooked up. You might want to plug in and just give them a test and see how they work. Getting back to my fire alarm specialist, I met a guy one day and I was asking him about these, and he says they don't work. He says they're horrible. He says the telephone system for firefighters in high-rise buildings is flawed. He said it's a bad design where the jacks go into the plug. He says, he told me it's bad technology. You see, really what they should have done when they built the building, it wouldn't have cost that much more, is have phones stationed in those locations, okay, where people could use them and the firefighter could use them if they needed help. They should have been hardwired, then they would have worked. But they don't work very well, is what my experience is. So after I talked to him, he told me it was flawed. I do fire drills in high-rise buildings and multi-story buildings every week, and the ones that have the firefighter telephone system, I would plug them in and tell the alarm specialist I'm going to do that. So I want you to answer to see if it's working. And so I did it in 2 or 3 buildings, and 75% of the times when I plugged in the fire phone jack, he never answered because it doesn't work. So, if you're a building owner or a building manager or chief engineer, you may want to send an email to your fire inspector asking them how often these phones must be tested. If they say they must be tested, let's say as an example, every year, I don't know what the law is in your jurisdiction. If they say they need to be tested or are required to be tested every year, I recommend you do it immediately. Then you get them fixed. And then in 30 days, do them again. If some more are broke, then do them every 30 days until they all get fixed. If you can do them 30 days and they work, then maybe do them every quarter until they all get fixed. But 1 year is not going to work. And you need to keep impeccable records on all these tests, the locations to where they didn't work, the money you spent, the receipts to get this stuff working. Okay? So that if you have a disaster in that building, after you leave that building to go to another building, you'll have documentation, hopefully that will stand up in court without you talking, to show that you did what you could with a flawed system to be sure the firefighter could talk to each other during a fire emergency. Now, new buildings don't have these anymore. We've got a couple in the city of Houston where I've been working in, and they have what's called the Emergency Responder Radio Coverage Test, which is now required in new buildings. These are no more. This is going to be a very good law for the firefighter and for the building in general, because you have to do a test before you can occupy the building, before you can get your certificate of occupancy. The law requires, in several cities in Texas, and it's probably all over now, before you get your certificate of occupancy, you must have 95% coverage on the firefighter walkie-talkie. It must work on 95% of the floor, for all the floors. If it doesn't, you must make adjustments. You must put in boosters. It gets technical to where they have 95% coverage in the entire building. That's the new buildings. However, we got a lot of buildings with these. I recommend when I do my 3-hour consultation on site with upper property management employees, which is required by law in the city of Houston, before they can obtain or maintain their fire marshal approved fire safety plan, I highly recommend that they get their fire alarm company to give them a bid to do this test. Then send a proposal to the owner. If the owner will not pay for it, be sure you do everything by email, document it where it will stand up in court without you having to talk, and keep a copy the rest of your life. Remember, you will always be a prior building manager, chief engineer, a prior owner. If anything happens after you leave, they're probably going to come and try to hold you accountable and blame you for not doing what you could to make that building safer when you were there. So you must keep impeccable records. If I can ever help you, please don't hesitate to contact me. I do travel to different states to do training. Thank you.